Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking out the time on a Wednesday afternoon to join us for this very interesting and an important discussion. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you all to the first session of the five-part webinar series on collab matters. I'm Shruti Venkatesan, Associate Director, Saamuhika Shakti, and I'll be your host for the next 1.5 hours. Before we deep dive into the webinar itself, I would like to take a few minutes to set some context. So this five-part webinar series on collab matters is brought to you by Saamuhika Shakti and Sattva Consulting. Saamuhika Shakti is a Bengaluru-based collective impact initiative consisting of 12 partners who are working together towards enabling improved agency for the waste picker population so that they are able to lead a life of security and dignity. Sattva Consulting is a global impact consulting firm with its roots in India. Sattva is also currently serving as the backbone organization for Saamuhika Shakti. So, over the last 5 years, both Saamuhika Shakti and Sattva have been deeply engaging in facilitating cross-sectoral collaborations across diverse stakeholder groups. And in this journey, we've had a couple of critical learnings. One of the biggest learning has been that collective impact efforts are often not just influenced by funding processes and structures, but are also often influenced by a lot of these unsaid and often unidentified factors, that make or break these collective impact efforts. And that's how the genesis of the Collab Matters webinar series happened. We wanted to bring to you all some of these honest conversations and uncomfortable conversations and figure out a space where we can all share real life examples and case studies and learn together. And over the course of the next 1 year, as part of this five-part webinar series, we really hope to dig deep into some of these factors that shape collaboration, that enable seamless execution as part of collective impact initiatives, and also that factors that help grow some of these collective impact initiatives. Today's topic is based on when good intentions collide, and the focus is going to be on digging deeper into some of these enablers and inhibitors that influence collective impact initiatives. And to be able to moderate this discussion, I am super excited to invite Aarti Mohan. Aarti is the co-founder of Sattva Consulting, and over the last 1 decade has been anchoring multiple large-scale collective impact efforts in India's ecosystem. Before I hand it over to Aarti, a couple of hygiene measures. Please keep your videos on if you're comfortable. Keep yourself muted during the course of the discussion. Please feel free to use the chat box to introduce yourself as well as your organization. And we'll do the Q&A towards the end. We've kind of blocked almost 12 to 15 minutes just for Q&A. But during the course of the discussion as well, if you have any questions, please feel free to post it on the chat and we'll make an effort to answer all of your questions. That's all about it. On that note, I welcome you all again and over to you, Aarti.
Thank you, Shruti, and thank you all for joining us on this nice, pleasant afternoon from wherever you are, whichever part of the world you're joining us at. And, we've had so many rich learnings from what it takes to make collaboratives happen, but not just happen, right? Like for them to sustain and for them to grow. And I have such eminent panelists, so I'm really excited to be having this conversation. And Shruti and Zibi, maybe you could also highlight all of the panelists. And so just wanted to, start off very quickly with what is the backdrop that we are actually, looking at from a collaborative's point of view. Today in India, since 2020, reports say that the number of collaborative initiatives that have started and are still continuing and existing is literally tripled. And 6 times more funding is today going to collaboratives. We ourselves have seen the uptake among, from an intent point of view, among the domestic philanthropy, both CSR and family philanthropy, etc., be quite heavy. And it seems to be almost like a no-brainer, right? The efficiency and effectiveness of funding, the common learnings that you could have in terms of funding, in a collaborative and collective action format rather than funding alone. For the scale and size of the problem as well as the opportunities in India, it's becoming even more critical for, and almost de facto, I would say, to look at it as heterogeneous collaboratives coming together between Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar, right? Like, how do we get market, government, and civil society to come together in order to then look at what can be achieved collectively? But even with all of, even with all of these signs of light being evident, the number of questions that we are asking ourselves is also growing. The evolution is true from collaboratives that were looking more at collective negotiation and bargaining power, de-risking from a funder perspective, etc., to really, bring together different sections and segments of the impact sector. And the impact sector I use in a very loose way, because I would say that at Sattva we believe impact is everybody's business. So right from companies and businesses to NGOs, civil society organizations, social enterprises, ecosystem organizations, all of these are really, really pertinent to look at for a collective impact perspective. Some of the questions that we heard so many times are, what are the changes that we are seeing from collaboratives at a ground level, community level? Yes, but also for the members of the collective. What is it that allows it to be multiplicative rather than additive in impact? How do you measure shared outcomes, and what does that mean for each of us? And in a very deep way, who is represented versus who is present, and part of a collaborative? How do we make that space inclusive? All of these are questions that we've been hearing. And I would also want to say, and what is the Indian vocabulary on collaboratives? What is the Indian take on collaborative? So, would really love to hear from our eminent panel today. And I'm going to start here with Anushree Parekh from the British Asian Trust. So Anushree, you've been part of so many interesting collaborative initiatives for a very long time, right? From the SIIB kind of an initiative that's looking at skills, to initiatives that are working in education and now livelihood and so on. And you've also looked at the kind of financing and innovated on that as well when it comes to collaboratives. So what would you say in terms of, from your lived experience of the collaboratives British Asian Trust has been a part of, what makes this particularly challenging? What are the different power dynamics or differing visions or outcome plays that we are seeing when collaboratives come together? Would love to start with you, Anushree.
Thanks, Aarti, and thanks, Sattva team, for putting this together and creating this space for very open, candid, honest conversations. And dare I say, I think we're all going to invite some trouble for ourselves post this webinar. But in the spirit of sort of being absolutely honest, right? I think you're right, Aarti, that we've seen a lot of sort of tailwind in terms of just the acknowledgement that collaborating partnerships are important. I think something that started around COVID-19, when, at least in the funding ecosystem, which is also the ecosystem that I'll try and represent a little bit today, the realization dawned that the size of the problems that we have, and this was again kind of, highlighted by COVID, right? Around COVID, in terms of just seeing the crisis, the lives and livelihoods crisis play out. I think the donors finally sort of, realized, and the penny dropped to say that no matter what is the size of a resource, it's never going to be enough to address the problems, right? And so in coming together, I think we make our money go that much further, and we have a multiplier effect, right? So I think one is, there's a very distinct pre-COVID, post-COVID flavor to this, right? And especially in certain segments where collaboration initially was not as popular, right? And I especially want to say CSR, for example, right? We just saw huge momentum, huge level of interest. So I think that was in a way sort of, sort of a water, sort of a milestone moment for us in terms of domestic sort of philanthropy in India. I think from there on, right, the journey gets a little more tricky. So I think there are three parts to this question that you've asked me, or like I'd like to answer them in three parts, right? So you've said, what are the challenges? So I think first challenge, Aarti, is just really that this is not a perfect reality. it's not a utopia, right? As soon as you bring different types of stakeholders around the table, you are bringing not just that stakeholder, but you're bringing that stakeholder's organization, their own priorities, their own objectives, their own sort of, resource challenges or constraints, right? And not just funding, but availability of time, availability, understanding of an issue, etc. uh, and you are trying to move them in the same direction, right? The intent, and I mean, very aptly kind of named webinar also, the intent is there, right? And that's exactly why they agree to come together. But beyond that, creating an alignment that allows that overlap or intersection to happen is difficult, because like I said, there are priorities. Each organization or stakeholder comes with its priorities, its own kind of idea of what the problem is, what the solution should be, what the outcomes should look like. Are these good outcomes? Are we being ambitious? Are we lowballing? um, what will my role be in this? What will my contribution be in this? And I think uh, so that is the reality in which we are working in, which needs to be crafted, right? Because there are seldom solutions that will very neatly fall in that intersection of all of this. So I think that's our first challenge. A unique challenge, I think, in India probably is also a little bit around our regulatory landscape, because there are ways in which regulations allow us to collaborate and then don't allow us to collaborate, and we can't wish that away, right? So again, if thinking about CSR compliance, that's a prime sort of requirement or concern, right? Thinking about donors, FCRA donors, again, what does FCRA allow, doesn't allow, what is the interpretation? So I think second is the regulatory environment that we're working in, and including with the nonprofits, right? Because as India is one of the most regulated economies as far as nonprofits are concerned. So what can nonprofits do? How can they sort of engage, not engage, etc.? So I think second challenge comes when you are trying to stitch collaborations together and you have to work within the regulatory constraints that get thrown up, right? Because then that limits the ideal solution, right? If the ideal solution is to say everybody pool funds together, that's not going to happen, right? Because there will be restrictions on that. So I think that's the second part of this messy reality that we live in. Um, and the third part, Aarti, and I think this is becoming increasingly interesting to see how it pans out, is the understanding of the problem and the solution, right? Because we are now collaborating to solve a social issue or a social problem with the solution in mind. And not everybody has the same understanding of it. And in fact, you want that diversity of perspectives, right? So I could look at just one problem, say, if I can look at a problem at even just education, right? There are so many ways in which you can approach this, right? So are you trying to solve for attendance? Are you trying to solve for access? Are you trying to solve for equity? Are you trying to solve for learning outcomes? Are you trying to solve for sort of edtech adoption? So, and the more technical we become, right, with some of this, especially when you start getting into domains like edtech, smart agriculture, I think where you start intersection and the art and science of how do you solve this problem, I think at least in the funding ecosystem, we find that there are islands of very progressive understanding and excellence. And then there are these widespread plateaus where the understanding is not that great. So it takes time to basically understand and align on what is exactly the problem and why is the solution a good solution, right? So three broad things: priorities, regulatory landscapes, and understanding of these tricky, entrenched social issues that we are all trying to come together to solve for. I'll just stop there.
Thanks a ton, Anushree. And it's a great segue to Ashif Ji from Sahas on the Migrant Resilience Collaborative came up in a time of great crisis, Ashif Ji. Like, so, you started it during COVID and it's got, 40 community-based organizations, and maybe it's grown more, 40 plus companies, 3 state governments, and lately it's traveled from India to, a few more countries as well. And we know for a fact that many of the collaboratives that started in COVID had a huge momentum, but sustaining that beyond the time of crisis became difficult, and that a lot of it was anchored on how you, when you started, what was the foundation, what were the values, what were the kind of frameworks and principles you set yourselves up for, and how strongly you started that. So I'd love for your learnings to come in here, because it's grown from strength to strength and country to country after COVID. So what's the secret behind the Migrant Resilience Collaborative?
Yeah. Thank you, Aarti, and thanks for this opportunity to share our learning and experience of MRC. So MRC means like a Migrant Resilience Collaborative, and as Aarti shared, we started this collaborative just after the first wave of pandemic. And everybody knows during the pandemic, the migrant community faced different kind of challenges at source, at transit point, or the destination. And basically lots of like the reverse migration from cities or like the destination places to the source villages. So basically at the time not lots of like the media people highlight this issue, lots of conversation in the policy making space to support these population. After that, some initiative from the government, also some initiative from the private sector. But actually, we realize we need a comprehensive effort and the long-term sustainable intervention with this population. Because as far as India is concerned, we have about 200 million migrant workers, and it's a huge population actually. And the biggest challenge is portability, because these like the community members are migrating from a one part of India to the another part of India. And as you know, in India, basically we have a federal structure. So the one state is providing different kind of like social security or the protection for the migrant community. But like if the person is traveling from Uttar Pradesh to Karnataka, the person is not able to get lots of benefit because of non-availability of the portability. And still like the portability is a very big challenge. So in that context, we realize we need a very big, large scale program where we will intervene at a ground level at a source villages, as well as we will work at the destination. So at the time, we identify about 100 districts, like the 80 source location, and about 20 big cities like Bombay, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, all these cities. And basically, we decided to work at both the level source as well as at the destination at the same time, because the worker required support at both the places, because they required like the social security at source and the protection at a destination also. So we engaged with the different organization, not-for-profit organization, labor unions, and the different stakeholders, and basically co-create this whole idea of Migrant Resilience Collaborative. At the time, we also realized no any single organization can work with 200 million like the people, but at the same time, not only NGOs can make the overall change at the community level, the different stakeholders are also involved. So for example, like the private sector companies, particularly construction companies, manufacturing units, big brands, their suppliers, or like the people involved in the supply chain. And then the second like the stakeholder is like the local authorities, the BOCW board, state government, labor department. And the third and the most important, community or the community-based institution. So basically in the first phase, we try to engage with about 100 organizations, a different kind of organization, including like big brands or the companies. So we are working with the Godrej and Tata Reality, Mahindra Lifestyle, these kind of like the construction companies. But we are also working with the local and the small size companies also. And basically we also realize no any one donor or single donor can support these kind of initiative. So we required to diversify funding from the different source or different donors, because some donors are very much keen or support to the tech solutions. So in our collaborative, one of the most important thing is to develop a tech platform, and that platform is supporting large scale migrant workers. So currently about 80 lakh families or household are part of our tech platform. We are reaching out to about like 4 crore like the migrant worker and their family members. And till like the last month, we unlock about like 90 lakh social security benefit through this platform. And we also develop a helpline, because most of the time the migrant workers are very vulnerable, and sometimes basically they fall into the trafficking and other like the exploitative situations. So basically we started a helpline, and in initial period of time, like during the pandemic, every day we receive about 5 calls, 10 calls. But nowadays, every month we receive between 20,000 to 25,000 calls from across India, mostly like 300 to 400 districts workers are calling us, and they require different kind of like the support. So in this collaborative, I think we learned 2-3 very important lessons. So the first thing, like if we wanted to make a big change or like the system level change, not only and if we are depend only on the NGO or the not-for-profit sector, that's not a right strategy. We need to engage different kind of stakeholders, and sometimes in these stakeholders some conflicts are there. So for example, traditionally in India we thought if you are a not-for-profit organization, you're not very comfortable to work with the private sector. If you are a worker rights organization, little bit difficult to work with the government or labor department. But I think in this kind of like the platform, if we can engage the different kind of stakeholders, we can create a huge impact. So that's the first thing. The second thing, like the whole debate between the deeper work or the scale, because both the things are very important. So how the migrant worker can get like the immediate support through the helpline, but the same time social security benefit in terms of like the pension or insurance or any other kind of support, but how we can reach millions of people. Because as I said, in India, if we wanted to like create a huge impact in the migrants' life, there is like 20 crore people, 20 crore migrant workers, and no any single organization can make the change. And basically the technology is very, very important. So basically we are using very strategically technology to scale our program, but also we engage with the grassroots level organization. And currently more than 100 partners are part of this initiative, from the private sector to the investors also. So for example, some investors and the industry bodies are also part of the collaborative, and their role is completely different. Investors are pushing their investee companies to engage with these kind of like the program and engage with the community. And basically sometimes like the existing mechanism are not very effective. So just I will take 1 minute and close my response. So basically in India nowadays, the pandemic was definitely create a huge impact, but nowadays climate change is creating different kind of challenges for the migrant population, particularly like air quality in Delhi NCR area, or heat in Delhi or South India, or water crisis in Bangalore and many other places. So basically we come up with a new idea, and that idea is a parametric insurance. And basically in this parametric insurance, as a not-for-profit organization, what we are not allowed or eligible to implement this kind of like intervention. So strategically we engage with the insurance company, and that's a Go Digit. So the Go Digit general insurance company, they underwrite the whole insurance product. We also engage with the reinsurer called KM Dastur, and our partner organizations are implementing these insurance at a ground level for the migrant and informal sector workers. So our first pilot on like the AQI, air quality index in Delhi NCR area, and the second pilot that we recently completed on 15 July, that pilot on the heat waves. So how the workers can protect from these kind of like the climate risk, and if they face any difficulty, so the like the company can pay them, and they can cover their daily wage through the insurance product. So these kind of like the innovation, if we wanted to implement, I think again collaborative is very powerful tool to engage with the insurance company and the reinsurer, and that's a not very like the traditional alignment, because the NGOs mostly working with the government, mostly working with the philanthropy and donor, but these kind of like the engagement are a little bit like non-traditional. And I think always we try and test these kind of like non-traditional alignment and the collaborations. Yeah.
No,
Thank you.
very interesting what you said, because it sounds like on one hand, you are really looking at the scale of simple innovations from insurance to other products that can be then deployed, but that requires as much designing and rollout, which is sustainable, as much as resolving for the tension. So therefore, the innovation in the process itself, how can a union or an advocacy organization work with the government? How can an NGO work with the private sector? So there are a lot of these tensions that it looks like you're as an with that intermediate structure and bringing the collaborative together. So innovations at both levels would be very interesting to hear more as we go to the next round. I want to go from understanding how such a large organization of a collaborative happens to Namrata, to ask about the nuances from a depth perspective, right? Like, so Namrata, you've talked earlier as well about, when you join a collaborative, a bit of your individual, identity, institutional sort of expertise and all of that has to undergo a certain transition to then successfully be a collaborative partner. So from your, experience of running the FRSN in skills at Quest Alliance, how did you resolve for this? How did you operationalize this within the collective? And how did you also support the organizations in retaining their, in some sense, their equitable position? Because we know for a fact that these power equations exist and homogeneously as well as heterogeneously. So I'd love for you to come in on that.
Sure. Thanks, Aarti, and thanks for inviting me here. I think apart from the Future Right Skills Network that we actually anchor, we also anchor another education collaborative with a lot of smaller grassroots organizations. We are part of about 3 other collaboratives where we are one of the, we are a part of the whole, basically. We don't anchor it, but we are part of the whole. So we do have experience of anchoring collaborators, but also being part of collaborators. So we've seen like both sides of the nuance that you're talking about. I think one a very early stage collaborator that we were a part of, and this was in Jharkhand with other organizations as well. There is a certain sense of what is my identity. So for example, we had this big staff meet, and the team that was working on the collaborative came and said, "Hi, I'm so and so, and I'm from this project, right?" And we were like, "Shouldn't they be from Quest Alliance or shouldn't they be from this state?" But they took on the identity of the project, and for us that was a little uncomfortable because we felt like, is there no organization identity internally, right? But I think to be comfortable to say that you hold multiple identities, I think is one. That helped. I think most collaboratives also have a more neutral identity than a one leading identity. That has also been very helpful for us. I think language is important. Like how much do we use I, how much do we use we? And a lot of times it's like I am a representative of my organization in this collaborative, rather than saying, that needs to shift from saying that I am doing this work as part of this collaborative. So it doesn't matter what organization I come from. So that shift also, it takes a little time for us to kind of make it. And I think one other thing that we've done is in the FRSN specifically, it's about 5 donors that come as part of the collaborative. Initially, when we started off, the idea was that everybody gives an equal amount of money, right, to maintain that equity lens. But what happened over a period of time is some donors said, "Hey, I'd like to give in more money," and some donors said, "Hey, I think this year I can give only so much." And then there was a dialogue saying, "Okay, whoever has funded more, should they be given more priority even from like a logo space, right? Or whoever is not funded X, should their name not be there if you're doing, say, an event and I have not funded that event?" And we actually took a call, and this was a dialogue with our donors saying, you're all here as part of the collective, right? If the pie is 100, someone's given 50, someone's given 5, 10, it doesn't matter. We will put all names on the logo panel in an alphabetical order, right? And this is not up for discussion, right? There was no like, but what if? And that was a dialogue and conversation that needed to be had. And I think it also, credit to people who were in the room who were more revolved, said, yes, fine, let's do this. So till today, 5 years, FRSN follows that, right? No matter who's contributing how much, we have like a minimum amount that everybody comes in. But if there are people who will contribute more, this idea of who's big, who's small, right? Those are things that we've said that there is no differentiation. It's all people who've come in together. That's one of the things we've been able to do. I think there's another collaborative we've had like 3 large organizations, 3 large NGOs, and now we're inviting a lot of local place-based nonprofits to be a part of. And there is that power dynamic even within NGOs, right? Like who's bigger, who's doing what kind of work, who has what kind of organization, budgets, etc., etc. And I think one thing we realized is that some of the local NGOs, even language was a little bit what signaled power, right? So that wasn't something that came naturally. Like we naturally have all conversations in English, but we realize if this is a collaborative that's running in, say, a Bihar or a Jharkhand, Hindi is the most common language for a lot of local civil society organizations. So today, emails go out and then it's written in Hindi as well, right? The same conversation is had in Hindi and English as well. What then means is, it means someone has to put in that effort. It means that there is more time that needs to be given when you have a dialogue because it is held in 2 languages. And that isn't easy. It's easier said than done. It feels like suddenly a meeting that is for 1 hour now is 1.5 hours, right? And then everyone needs to be okay and to have that patience. And that's where I feel sometimes the role of also the facilitator comes in to say, we've had really good facilitators, people like Sattva, who've come in and said, okay, we balance the funder, we balance the CSO, we balance other partners like Ashif said. But we've also been part of certain spaces where, we all sometimes become like implementing partners for the donors, right? And that's where the huge power dynamic also plays out. So the role of a facilitator in ensuring that this is an equitable space is, I think, very, very important. And that we dissolve our identities, which mean that then you celebrate everything. You're a part of the problem and solution. And then you're not, I am Quest Alliance, but I am solving this problem as part of this collaborative. That takes a little time for everyone to kind of feel that, like everyone who's part of that group needs to feel that. So that's just some things that we have been actually able to do, and it's work in progress. There's always something new that crops up when somebody says, like, we still have issues where in a collaborative where people have said that, you say it's a collaborative, but it is, 80% of the funding is going to or 60% of the funding is going to one partner. How is that a collaborative, right? Or like when you do a government meeting, who's on the table? So if it is 2 NGOs and 3 NGOs are not on the government table, how is it a collaborative, right? And there are people who've actually not joined because they have felt like it is not in true sense a collaborative, right? So it is these minor nuances that one has to say that, okay, does everybody then go to a government negotiation? So if you're not there, which is the space that you're occupying? So the identification of roles, responsibilities, and not putting one role over the other. There's also a hierarchy in who does what kind of work, right? So if you're building a toilet on the ground or you're going and talking to a minister in a collaborative, are these celebrated equally? Are these positioned equally? And do we have equal value for all of these kinds of work? I think that's a very important nuance that one needs to be always mindful of when conversations are happening. And I'll stop.
Thanks for beautifully laying out how some of these deceptively simple things unroll to really look, yield complex questions and, perspectives around identity, power, contribution, being at the same table. So, and lots for us to think through in terms of keeping a watch on this, right? Like there's one which is to firefight once it happens, but how do you then keep it in view every time we do this? And thanks for also stressing the role of that invisible facilitation, right? Like that of the backbone, that of the piece that holds it all together, because that's then the situation where the collaborators are optimizing for the collaboration rather than handling a lot of these hidden complexities, which is sort of getting absorbed. Would love to go from there to VK Madhavan. So there is this initial phase, which is exciting. We've come together, we're doing a lot of good stuff and it's starting to look very promising. But then after that, that's like the dating phase, right? Like then after that, things get stable. They may get, it's the same, repeatable action that's going on again and again. And at some point it plateaus, it gets tiring, exhausting. So Madhavan, you've been part of the Saamuhika Shakti, which is now in its 5th year. And what has kept it energized, vigorous and rigorous? What has kept the magic sort of, within all of the organizations? What has kept it from experiencing that fatigue? And even if you're experiencing fatigue, how do you come back? So if you could give us more of that, aged vintage perspective on how a collaborative continues to function.
Thanks, Aarti. So I think we've already heard from Ashif, Namrata, Anushree about different kinds of collaboration. It could be around changing the lives of people, like Ashif talked about migrant workers, or about thematic areas of work around education or skills. I think the first thing that is critical to keep the collaborative going is to not lose sight of clarity on whose lives do we want to change, why and how. And this clarity of purpose should not be limited only to heads of organization, but it needs to percolate down to every level that will need to collaborate, right? Because if your community facing individuals, your team colleagues there at a community level who are interacting with similar people from other organizations don't get it as well, collaboration doesn't happen, right? It's not, if it has to take root and it has to be real, then this clarity of purpose is required at all levels and needs reinforcement, right? So second is that you need constant reminders about the fact that collective impact will lead to better outcomes than one organization trying to do it on its own, right? There was a time historically where a lot of developmental work started off in the assumption that poverty is multidimensional and therefore you need to have integrated approaches to development, right? Over time, in dealing with this question of scale versus, just going deep, one's tended to see very linear single theme on scale being rolled out. But the fact is that in a finite, if you're working with a finite community and if you have 12 partners, all of whom are looking at different aspects of the life of the same community and finding ways to address it, you would assume that this is likely to have a better impact in terms of change than any single organization with a very narrow focus being able to do it, right? So this constant reminder of the fact that this collective effort is certain to lead to better outcomes, I think needs to be reinforced constantly. The third is around the ways of tracking these outcomes, right? Because this is an assumption that we're making. And at the end of the day, you need to provide people with reassurance that the belief that brought them together is still valid and that there is data or evidence to support that what you're doing is meaningful and is contributing to the change that you actually wish to see. So to have ways of tracking these outcomes to keep the momentum going and then disseminating it, I think is very important to keep that fire going, right? The last, I think, is the need to sort of appreciate different contributions made by different partners in a collaborator. Everybody brings something unique to this partnership. And I think without this appreciation of the unique contribution that each partner in the collaborative makes, you can't keep them together. And so all of these require constant reinforcement, revisiting. I think it's important to recognize that change takes time. Some kinds of change are easier, quicker to see, some take much longer. And therefore, this constantly revisiting clarity, importance of collective action, looking at what is the progress that you're making with regard to outcomes, and this appreciation of the unique strengths that people give, I think is what ensures that you keep your fatigue to a minimum and keeps the flock together.
Oh, lovely. I mean, these seem like fairly one-on-one things, but implementing it must be so nuanced. So thanks for bringing that in such a crisp way to us, Madhavan. I'm going back to Anushree. Anushree, you, I mean, as British Asian Trust, you also talk to various different funders, financiers. You're literally co-designing with them in a lot of ways. And Ashif ji also pointed out how different funders can come for different anchoring, right? Like somebody in tech, somebody in looking at the government enablement and so on. So what are your suggestions or advice to funders in terms of, navigating early stage alignment, how their role in supporting the collaborative during its time of establishment? What does trust-based funding mean in this context?
Thanks, Aarti, for that. No, you're right. I think, look, one is we've been fortunate because at least the kind of partnerships or collaboratives that we've done, and like Madhavan sir said, there can be many such types, right? The ones that we do, you can collaborate for policy change, you can collaborate for research, you can collaborate for advocacy. We generally collaborate for execution, right? And using a very specific philosophy or approach, which is outcomes-based financing. And I think there is value in looking at some of these frameworks, whether it's collective impact, whether it is outcomes-based financing, because they provide a blueprint for partnerships, right? They provide a formula for partnerships. See, partnerships is art and science. The art is the human aspect of holding everyone together, like Madhavan said. But the science is to actually rely on some of these frameworks, because what these frameworks do is help you to actually solve for the challenges that we are talking about, right? Which is alignment on outcomes, alignment on roles and responsibilities, alignment on how decisions are going to be made in this collaborative or in this partnership, right? Alignment on how conflicts are going to be resolved. So I feel firstly, there is merit in just looking at some of these frameworks that exist and trying to, of course, localize them and contextualize them for your use, right? Now, when we talk about outcomes-based financing, I think, and again, very sort of, even if you don't believe in outcomes-based financing, the principles of aligning on outcomes as the first and foremost step in your collaborative, right? What is, like Madhavan said, what's our purpose? And I think outcomes-based financing goes a step further to say, what is our purpose? What is the outcome? How are we defining that outcome, right? Because today I might say that, okay, my outcome is youth in jobs, right? But is your outcome that more youth join jobs? Are your outcomes that more youth get skilled so that they can find jobs on them by themselves? Is your outcome that more young people are staying in their jobs? Is your outcome that these jobs are decent jobs so that they're improving their quality of life, right? The more time that we spend in discussing this upfront, the better it is when the collaboration actually hits implementation and when the rubber hits the road, right? So I think taking the time required to build that consensus, and I think Namrata, you're so right? Partnerships are painful. What can be done in 1 month, it will take you 3 months when you're trying to align 7 people. So don't underestimate how much time this will take, and take the time, right? So take the time to align on this. I think the other thing I find, and which we sometimes shy away in the social sector because it is such a values-based sector, we shy away from the importance of governance and contracting, right? See, trust doesn't get built in a vacuum, right? Trust requires a scaffolding. The scaffolding can be dismantled once you've, used it to actually create your foundation, right? But on day one, if you bring 3 people together in a room and say, okay, blindly trust each other, that's not happening, right? So what is the scaffolding that is required for trust-based? And trust-based philanthropy is not at counter-purpose to outcomes-based contracts or, a sort of a outcomes, more contractual ways of working, even in a collaborative, right? Because essentially you're using these as stepping stones. You're using your governance mechanism, right? Who will decide? How will you decide? Will you, if you have a group of 20 people, will all 20 people take all 20 decisions? Then, good luck to you. You're never going to get anything done, right? But will only 5 people take those decisions? How did you select those 5 people? Have you represented the voice of the donor, the implementation partner, the evaluator, the policy maker in that decision making, right? How will you solve for certain issues? What are the issues that can come up, right? So if you are working in a collective impact model, common measurement is always problematic because you actually have to align on that. I think we sometimes rush into collaboratives, and I'm talking of collaboratives that are geared for implementation. We sometimes rush into it without spending time discussing this, without spending time documenting and creating that governance understanding. So I think my second thing is that if you want to get to a trust-based place in 2 years' time, you're going to have to start with the scaffolding, right? Governance, contract, and data. My third part of the scaffolding is data, because data brings transparency. What will you collect? Who will you share that data with? By when will you share? Why will you share that data? What will that data lead to? What should you not use that data for, right? Don't use it to start policing. Don't kind of, start splitting hairs. But so 3 big scaffolding that is required to get to eventually a trust-based collaborative. And we've seen this in Skill Impact Bond. When we started, we took almost 9 months to construct the premise, to construct the outcomes framework, the evaluation framework. And we have an 150-page, what we call like a mother contract with 7 people, like 7 organizations, not even 7 stakeholders, 7 organizations signing off on common liabilities, on common warranties. So it's an insane level of collective working, right? Not everything needs to be that. But having taken those 9 months to set it up, I can tell you for sure that our 4 years of execution have felt like a piece of cake. You have a problem on evaluation. We decided and we documented that this is how we will solve this. One donor has left. We decided, we anticipated, we decided that this is how we will address if a donor leaves. Somebody needs to be replaced. We've solved, right? I'm not saying you'll be able to solve for all of it, but taking the time and the thoughtfulness and the intentionality to anticipate this and to create the scaffolding. 2 years into the project, Aarti, nobody even looked at that document, right? People said, okay, you have an issue on ground. Tell us what your issue is. We trust you. Go ahead. You can't do this center. You need to drop the center. You need to go to another place. Just go ahead, right? But to start with, that was required, right? So I think that's something. So the alignment on outcomes or purpose, the scaffolding for trust, which is governance, contracts, and data systems and architecture, right? And I think the last thing, like I said, is the time that this will require. I think the role of backbone is important, Aarti, but I know different people have touched upon it. A backbone with accountability to outcomes, not a backbone with an accountability to a particular stakeholder. Extremely difficult, easier said than done, right? I will always take a decision which is in the benefit of my community and their outcomes. I'm not going to be a backbone that takes a decision because of power dynamics, because it's the path of least resistance. So I think those for me are the four sort of ways in which, you know, we've at least managed to do this.
Very well put, and lots of gems of insights there in terms of, you know, what are these nuances when you're setting up these contracts, and cannot overemphasize the time taken to draw up good versions of these, so that then after that it doesn't come in the way of you going after the outcomes. Ashif ji, I'm going to come back to you. In the Indian context, right? Pooling of funds not happening. The regulatory environment makes it very different for a CSR, and that's been brought up in the panel before, versus a FCRA, you know, contracting funder versus, you know, unions versus nonprofits, and then you have social enterprises from which getting data, good luck to you. So there are so many of these things that are true in the Indian context. So what have been your top learnings of what is the Indian model of looking at effective collaborative action? And which of these was transferable for you when you moved from India to expand to Indonesia, Philippines, some of the other geographies?
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge, or like the risk that we face in the initial period of time, and particularly when we launched the Migrant Resilience Collaborative, basically the compliance related issues. Because in our collaborative, we have lots of like a very small grassroots level organization, and they are working without the FCRA or that kind of like the compliance. Some organizations are mid-sized organizations, they have FCRA compliance and all these things. And some organizations basically in process to develop a social enterprise, where their model is a little bit like the hybrid kind of like the model. So basically in that situation, we realize the traditional model of the collaborative will not work very effectively in this kind of like this situation. So purposefully we took a decision that donor will not lead this collaborative, because many times like the some donors came together, they pool their funds, and then basically they guide us or help us to basically initiate these kind of like large intervention. But in this case, basically we decided to play that kind of like role independently, and basically co-create the ideas, co-create the strategy, and co-implement the program. So that was a main or core value. But in that process, we required some very strong support from like the compliance and other things. So we engaged Edelgive Foundation or like the Global Development Incubator, and these two organizations help us a lot to grow the independent collaborative. And the donor's role is also very crucial, but more to support the whole like the collaborative through like funding the small scale organization, or like provide a big funding for a tech and some other very important component of the program. So that was our like the journey. So that's why I always basically refer to these kind of ideas are more complicated, these structures are more complicated, but the beauty of this complexity is the sustainability. Because the whole collaborative is not depend on 1 or 2 or 5 donors, because currently about 15 to 18 like the different philanthropies are supporting this initiative. The private sector nowadays is paying the cost actually. So we are also trying we will not completely depend on the grant or like the philanthropic contribution, but how we can unlock the funding from the businesses and other stakeholders. So that kind of like the idea, we can easily grow in this situation where our structure is a little bit complicated. And basically the this whole sometimes people are thinking the whole collaborative idea is come from outside India. But in India, from last 20-30 years, I know lots of like the grassroots level collaboratives are there. Only the thing is they are not using this terminology collaborative or the network. They are using different kind of like the language or the narration about their work. So that's a challenge. But I think in India we have a history to collaborate and basically work at a ground level. So that's a one thing. Then about 2 years ago, we realized, and basically in many other countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Philippines, the population of migrant is also very high in this geography, and they wanted to scale the similar kind of like the program. And our whole idea is how we can unlock the government benefit that already available, and basically if we can facilitate or if we can help the facilitation process so people can unlock. So we started with Nepal. In Nepal, there's 5 organizations. They decided to basically come up and create similar kind of like the idea. And now the MRC Nepal, basically they are focusing on internal migration, but as well as the cross-border migration. They are also helping the people migrating from Nepal to India. And there is a corridor India to Nepal also, because lots of skilled workers are going from India to Nepal. In Indonesia, for example, lots of organizations are working in on the like the social protection related issues, but now they are using technology, and that's our contribution and learning to the local organization, because we are sharing our so basically we develop a technology called Jan Sathi. It's a mobile based application, and now we rename this like the tech platform into Resilience Connect, and now the Resilience Connect is using by other organization outside India. So the whole idea is how we can build the collaborative at a ground level, where the people will use their knowledge, use their skills, use their current like the capacity, and build the collaboratives, and basically the philanthropy, private sector, and the other stakeholders can go and support these ideas. So basically the leadership or the community members or the grassroots level organizations are in the forefront, and they are playing a very important or crucial role for the decision making. And I think that's a whole goal related to the collaborative, where the people, affected people or people with the lived experience, they are taking the decision or they are in the driving seat.
Got it. No, very interesting to see those interconnections even when you grow cross borders, right? Namrata, coming to you, and I know that we are also running short on time, so I'm just gonna, you and Madhavan to sort of keep it quickly and then go to the audience. Namrata, you spoke about how nonprofits sometimes feel less fulfilled being in a collaborative. So what will help rebalance? Another interesting thing you said when we spoke is also that, hey, we look at collective outcomes a lot and we sort of gear up to do that. But what change has it caused in an individual organization by being part of a collaborative? So if you could touch upon these couple of nuances.
Sure. So I think my reflection came from our own experience, but also reading a report that I think Richman had done last year. They looked at the satisfaction levels of various players in a collective action. And I think for funders, it ranged between 70 to 80%. For the backbone organizations, it ranged somewhere in the 65 mark. And for the implementing partners, it ranged at a 40% mark, right? The report is available on the web, you can read it. So I think that was also a telling case. And then we reflected back on what does it mean for us? I think fundamentally, some of these things that we're talking about, and we've learned this over time, is working in collaborative takes time, right? Things are slow. And as a DNA, sometimes we have a need to move much faster, right? At least I'm talking of our organization. So the slowness is what we feel like, kitna time spent kare, like we're spending so much time and like things are moving so slowly, right? So that's one cause of, it's actually a little bit of rewiring, right? That if you're achieving a larger vision and mission collectively, then to be fundamentally very sure, like what Madhavan ji also said, we can't do this alone. And sometimes it feels like slipping into it, hum khud kar lenge, jaldi ho jayega, right? So I think that is one part of the thing, saying there is this idea of slowness. Second, we've talked about the patience and the time that it takes to build trust, to build a safe space, to build, space for dialogue, conversation, not just firefight, like you said, Aarti. We are actually in a collaborative where we are designing a phase 2.0 of the collaborative. Phase 1 was done. That redesigning has taken 1 year, right? Because it's been truly done. And some of the civil society organizations are redesigning it. And this is over and above continuing phase 1. This is over and above the roles that we do within our organizations, all our day-to-day other stuff that we do. And we are playing this additional role. And internally, we were like, how much time are you spending and who's paying for it? Right? Because everybody knows in civil society, someone's doing 2% job, if not 3% role, right? So who's paying for all of this? That is, I think, the second part. I think the third part is maybe a cultural thing, if I may say so. There is a higher, I think there's also, with all this growing funding, there's a need for everyone to shine, right? There's a need for spotlight, there's need for attention. And obviously, if I'm doing something individually, I feel I get a lot more spotlight. But you get lost in the whole in a collective. So that again is a huge rewiring, saying, how do I see myself as part of the whole? And how do I celebrate the whole and know that eventually, as part of the whole, the work will spread, the mission will be achieved, and eventually whatever I'm seeking, be it funding, be it spotlight, being whatever, will come your way. It may not come faster, but it will come with bigger, better, nicer ways. I think the idea of going solo versus the idea of going collective needs a fundamental rewiring. I think some of the dissatisfaction or unhappiness stems from that. And I think we're also yet to learn on how to facilitate and run collaboratives really well. Like someone was saying, the backbone organizations are in the service of the mission, not anyone's stakeholders. Funders need to also know when to step back, and then to say, this is what we had designed. Like, we've had some funders who pushed us to do certain things, and then that's where frustration comes and saying, are we achieving a mission? We've had funders who step back and say, you tell us what needs to be done, and we've redesigned things to twice, thrice over, right? So I think one is that freedom, and then it is an interesting idea of having the independence, but being interdependent. Like, somebody else's work slows down my work, right? What does that mean for me? So I think these are some of the things why there is a little bit of unhappiness and dissatisfaction. But I feel like we are wiser now from what we were before. I think all of us, when we design collaborators, even today when we start or someone says, do you want to be part of this? Capacity is a big part of saying, do we have the people? Do we have teams? It's not like someone will just spend 20% and this will get done. When we started 4 years back, that is how we had allocated people, right? And that's where some of the stress came in. But we are wiser now. So I think also it may be good to say, okay, if you're planning to be in a collaborative as an organization, an implementing partner, what are the things that you need to take care of? We also realize that people we put in collaborators are different from what we had originally put, right? Because you need a certain skill to negotiate, navigate, listen. So even we said, okay, we just put somebody and we said, oh, now it's not working for us. Now we need somebody else to do it. So all of these, I think, have been learnings. I think, like, as we mature, as the space matures, as all of us as actors mature, I wouldn't say this is like things we can't solve for, but it's something we've learned. I'm sure if we do this 3 years down the line, you'll see much better score. That's just what I feel and I hope for. And I think we've seen some of that in our own work as well. Maybe it needs a larger, knowledge out there saying that if you are planning to enter, what are the do's and don'ts, what kind of people you need, resources, time, mental rewiring that all of us need, and maybe sometimes you might say that this is not for me, because I have my own agenda, I have my own speed, I have my own mission, and I don't want to be part of this, right? It's also okay. So
no, absolutely. That should be okay as well in terms of, respecting somebody's ability and intent and practical reality of being part of the collaborative or not. Thanks for so many interesting points to take away from there. Building on what you had pointed to, Madhavan, I wanted to ask you, sometimes because nonprofits and other organizations in the social impact sector are kind of competing for a limited pool of resources, right? And everyone is at a certain stage of evolution, and especially when you're operating in a proximate setup like you're doing in the Saamuhika Shakti, you could well say this is core, and I can also extend to a certain other set of things that I can do. So then in such a case, what practical steps would you recommend for funders and implementers to, work towards share ownership, look at these turf battles kind of differently? How do you look at it from a, once a foundation of trust and transparency is built in various ways, like how Anushree pointed out, how do you sort of negotiate and, handle such situations of both explicit and implicit conflict?
So I think, Aarti, we need to start off by recognizing that just in the space of this conversation, there are broadly 3 different kinds of collaborators, right? There are those where organizations working with communities choose to come together, where money is not the glue, where finances are not the glue that bind them together, right? It's the mission, the purpose. You then have collaborators where you have implementing organizations, private sector, philanthropy, donors, like Jan Sahas talked about, Migrant Collective. And then you could have things like Saamuhika Shakti, where you have a single donor, then bringing together 12 organizations to collaborate together. So each of them are going to have nuances around competition, which will need to be addressed with very differently. Right? But if we were to look at our own experience with, Saamuhika Shakti over the last 5 years, it's a single donor. But I think one of the smart things that they did early on was to say that like each organization, you have multiple partners, but each partner has a very specific, unique contribution to make. And so the quantum of resources available for delivering on that task is unique to what that organization seeks to do. So you didn't start off from a space of equity and try and, and some of the challenges that Namrata talked about earlier, saying that everybody is, if 4 partners, is X amount of money available, you divide X by 4 and that's it. Here it was, what is the contribution what's the task that you have to do? How much is it going to cost you? And you had these conversations, but were done in a transparent manner, where every partner felt that their contribution was being valued and they were getting supported for it. So there wasn't this competition for resources. That didn't happen at all, right? The second is that I think there are 2 very important takeaways from the point of view of the backbone. One which Anushree brought out brilliantly, which is to say that the backbone has to be outcome focused. It can't be seen as favoring, supporting any other actor in this mix. I think the other addition to this is that if you have a backbone, it is important for that backbone not to be, the backbone has to be neutral, but more importantly, has to be perceived to be neutral. And so when you have a backbone and everybody perceives that backbone to be neutral, it makes it easier, right? Because then you have a Sherpa, for want of a better word, whom everybody trusts and is willing to rally around. No? I think the third thing is that you need to look at decision-making platforms for the collaborative at different levels. So heads of institutions could be one level, then you could have project managers, and you could have community level people. But each platform is a way of reinforcing that collaboration. So to use each level of that for decision making, to review, plan at multiple levels across each organization, then coming together, just deepens that relationship, and that's what is very critical to avoid this competition. It also is important to it allows for resolution of conflict at various levels, right? And finally, and it also builds solidarity. The last, I think, is that for any collaborative, there has to be constant reminders of both the strategic and moral imperatives of collaboration, right? It's strategic because it leads to greater, better outcomes. It's a moral imperative for people, particularly in the not-for-profit sector, because we've talked about collective action for communities forever. And if we're not willing to practice what we preach, we have no business doing this, right? So to me, I think all of this needs reinforcement, and that's what keeps the flock, binds people together. It can keep issues around competition at bay. Human insecurities will always remain, but institutionally, you've got to find a way to address them.
Thanks for that. I'm now literally holding the time and seeing the kind of audience questions we've got. This is like a rapid fire round, so please keep that in mind, panelists. I'll start with Anushree. What's the one thing about collaboration that no one told you but wish they had?
I think it's not romantic at all. It is very, very painful. And like Namrata said, it requires a lot of patience. It requires people with the right sort of skill set. And it takes a lot of time. It is a full-time job. So don't.
Kind of a pain that is growth. We should all trust. Coming to you, Namrata. How do you, if suppose stakeholders have incentives that are pulling them in different directions, and you elegantly pointed to that in so many different ways when you spoke earlier, how do you bring those stakeholders back to the shared purpose?
I think it's important to call it out that we are drifting, right? I think sometimes because of the power dynamics, there could be a tendency to not even call it out. If we start drifting once, I think it's a spiral loop downwards, right? So to be able to catch that spiral and have the courage, I think collaborators, when we've talked of safe space, it also needs to have courage to say that, hey, we're drifting. That's one, I think. And then to have someone whose designated role is to facilitate that conversation. I think that's the second one. third, I think eventually it is everybody being on the same page of the shared vision. But it is possible for whatever reason somebody may not agree to people getting pulled in different directions. For example, we work with a lot of CSRs, right? And there are times when they have needs. They said, this is not, but I agree with you, but I need this differently because I can't convince my board otherwise, right? There are two ways to do it. One, is there a workaround to this, saying the overall arching frame remains the same. If there's something you need from a reporting perspective, then I give you additional layer. If I have to, club one under two, I will give you something else. But like I said, like everybody is represented equally. That is a non-negotiable, right? So having certain non-negotiables are important. I think lastly, it's also important to then hold these non-negotiables side to side, right? We have had times when, especially donors have come and said, we want to be part of this collaborative. We've said no, right? Because they don't fit the non-negotiables. I don't know if a collaborative a donor has, especially donors or civil society organizations have walked out saying, it's not okay. But we have considered once or twice of walking out of a collaborative because it wasn't serving our purpose, right? Then we didn't, because it's also that tension, right? Saying that, am I here for the money? Am I here for the purpose? Am I here for something else? But I think courage, would be one. To courage to call out saying this is happening and we should be aware, right? Courage to be able to say that, a space or a facilitator to call it out. And I think a dialogue, there is no end of dialogues. And I think we need more of that. But if it's not working, I think certain amount of maturity. I think who comes into collaborative needs to be a more decision. And also to say, hey, if it doesn't work, there has to be an exit process as well. There's no point having people who are dissatisfied with the process. I would say these few things one should keep in mind so that there is no mission drift. And it's fine. People trying to go diverse ways, but like you said, it's a work in progress, not firefight. But catch these nuances when they are happening and address them, because sometimes we don't do them and we can see, I think there's a hidden undercurrent always, right? And I think the biggest role of a backbone player is to feel that undercurrent and to surface it. Then you won't reach a stage where there is a big disagreement. But I think that's very.
And there's no unicorn purpose, like you rightly pointed out, right? Like, why are you here? It's not to solve all the needs that you have, right? Like, so just being aware of that. No, thanks for that. Madhavanji, if there is one piece of advice that you'd like to leave with the audience as they, as they enter into collaboratives, what would you like them to think about, reflect on as they start?
I think some of these have already been very eloquently mentioned by Anushree and the others, right? We require patience. We need very clear purpose. And you've got to appreciate what everybody brings to the table, right? Without all of these, you can't create a foundation around which to work around. And it's just great fun. I mean, life would be so boring if you didn't try out these things.
Absolutely. One last question for all of you in brief is, what has worked for you to create that collaborative ethos within the organizations, teams, and people, so that, in a shared way, it just grows from there? Maybe Anushree, you could start off.
Aarti, in our case, it's just been very concrete, irrefutable proof that when people work collaboratively, we've achieved better outcomes, right? Because we've been doing this for years and years together. And we've actually realized the check-in challenge, the tension, the rigor, the questioning involved in a collaborative where you actually benefit from intellectual capital, that mutual discussions, dialogues, etc., and constructively kind of channelized towards outcomes. We've actually seen better outcomes when we've done collaboratives around outcomes-based financing than in other types of programs. And so that, I think, is the biggest proof that we need to motivate us.
Perfect. Madhavanji?
The problem is huge. It's complex, and we'd be arrogant to think if we can solve for it on our own. And therefore, there is no logic, but no other option but to collaborate.
Exactly. Namrata?
I think just to add, we've actually made collective action, whether collaborative or otherwise, as a very core part of it out. We've named it, we've called it out. It doesn't become something someone's doing on the side. It becomes a core part. It's also aspirational. And what we've done internally is a lot of team spaces. We invite people who are part of collective action to share learning. So it's also something like, other people in the team are now looking forward to and saying, hey, I want to be a part of something like that. right? So just making it a more core DNA of the organization, and making it more aspirational, calling it out, saying this is something Quest wants to do, has really helped motivate teams.
Lovely. And my most difficult job is to summarize this excellent discussion that we've just had. So I'm just going to, in a minute, try and sort of look at all of that we have covered. I mean, we started off with so many different nuances to starting a collaborative and keeping it together, from regulatory environment to looking at how do we look at a shared understanding of problems or solutions, how do we really codify from the very large life defining questions like what's our purpose, why are we here, to saying that how will we make decisions, how will we draw up the contracts, how will we look at the in what ways would we take a decision in case there are conflicts, and putting all of these down and taking that time to start up the collaborative came up. We looked at depth versus breadth, and in some sense it's an and in collaborative. So therefore, how do you bring elements of depth and breadth? How do you look at solving continuously for some of the tensions between different types of stakeholders coming in? How do we look at power in so many of the visible and invisible ways in which it creeps up and leads to not enough optimum outcomes, and therefore what does it take to solve for it? And also looking at very practically and from time to time revisiting this: what are we doing, why are we together, and how should we therefore be together as well? And all of you brought together so many interesting points about all three of these aspects. And lastly, it's an inevitability, like you all said. It's definitely, I mean, and it's a choice as well, right? Like, we should respect when we do not want to be part of something when it's not making sense anymore, but at the same time examine why it's not making sense, because at a larger level, this is the only way to go and grow together. So thank you, panelists, for an absolutely insightful discussion, taking away a lot. And I'm going to hand it back to Zibi to close.
Thank you, Aarti, and I think it's a fantastic discussion. So many nuances and perspectives shared on how to work together. Thank you, Anushree, Namrata, Madhavan, and Ashif ji. I think he dropped off because he had something else come up, and for sharing your insights and experience on the challenges of working together at this first session of Collab Matters webinar. I'm Zibi Jamal. For a very quick introduction, I take care of communications for Saamuhika Shakti along with my colleague Ekta, who's also here. And and Aarti, of course, you're guiding the conversation and drawing out all these diverse perspectives for all of us here. Thank you so much for doing that. And importantly, for all the audience that has joined here, thank you for joining this first session. We have 4 more in the Collab Matters series coming up. We will explore the role of the backbone, which some of the panelists had shared here. We will look into measurement systems, strategic communications, and of course, another important point, the capital that makes the collective action possible. Just want to quickly add, if you're open to sharing collaboration challenges that you have faced, and what have you done to overcome them, if we can hear from you, you can write to us. We are happy to curate and start dialogue on LinkedIn, of course, like tagging you in those messages. You can write to us at samuhikashakti@sattva.co.in. I think it's coming up on the screen on how to reach us. We are also on social media, all of those, LinkedIn, X, and Instagram. So we hope to see you at the next session. No more time. I think we are bang on at 3:15. Thank you very much for joining. Really, really happy to see everybody here, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.